Catholic Education Sandhurst acknowledges the traditional owners of the land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
Hello and welcome to Magnify Matters, a podcast proudly produced by Catholic Education Sandhurst. What are school leaders noticing as Magnify Sandhurst comes to life in our schools and classrooms? In this episode of Magnify Matters, host Tim Edwards sits down with Catholic Education Sandhurst learning leader Craig Simpson to reflect on the insights gathered from 4 school principals. Lorraine Willis, Catholic College Wodonga, Matt Carver, St Mary of the Angels College and St Francis Primary Nathalia, Jasmine Ryan, St Mary's Primary Echuca, and Alannah Darmody, St Liborius Primary Eaglehawk. Each principal shares how Magnify Sandhurst is unfolding in their school community, from clearer school expectations and positive routines to the growing impact of coaching and curriculum coherence. In this episode, we explore how consistency is building momentum and confidence among teachers, what leaders are noticing as clarity and shared approaches take root, the shift from individual effort to collective practice, why culture change is built through relationships and high standards, and what's next for 2025 and beyond. Whether you're teaching, leading, supporting system change, or listening in as a parent, this episode captures the early impact of Magnify Sandhurst from those closest to the work. Now stay with us as we magnify what truly matters.
Hello everyone, it's with great pleasure that we welcome you to Magnify Matters. In this season, we've heard about Magnify, a little bit of the story. First session with our Executive Director, Kate Fogarty. And through the podcast season, we've heard from all of our Magnify Sandhurst partners. Most excitingly, I'm joined by Craig Simpson, a learning leader playing a pivotal role in the rollout of Magnify Sandhurst. Craig joins us today. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to be here and what a privilege to be on the Magnify podcast. Thanks for inviting me.
Craig, tell us a bit about your role in the office.
Yeah, well, as you said, I'm a learning leader. So I'm one of 4 learning leaders. We've got a great team, a close-knit team and a hard-working team that's been really busy for the first 16 weeks of the rollout of Magnify. We've got portfolios that we're each responsible for. So my portfolios are sort of working around the science of learning with LME Global Partnership, working with Step Lab and also the data and assessment piece. But we work closely together, the 4 of us, along with your good self, and try and make sure that the Magnify initiatives are all hitting the ground and we're supporting schools best we can.
Doing a terrific job to this point of the year. Tell me a little bit about something that struck you so far this year.
Probably no surprise to anyone listening that knows a little bit of my background, especially from the last 10 years, that the way our Science of Learning Day is with Jared Cooney-Horvath, when we had 3 closure days, told every school to close down for 3 days and with no students, and that we're going to have this American beaming in for 3 days of online professional learning. And I know, understandably, there was some doubts for people about how does that roll out? How do we get whole school staff together for 3 days of online learning as such? And I think to everyone's great surprise and to great joy, really, the 3 days couldn't have gone over better. So personally, I was delighted because I've had a professional relationship with Jared, and to know that he was coming into the diocese was very exciting for me. But having that format of beaming in from, via Zoom, I wasn't so sure about either. But just the absolute response from schools was incredible, and to know that really brought together a lot of the understanding about why we're doing the initiatives that we are, and also why some people might feel the way they do about the amount of initiatives that we've introduced and what that does for us. Yeah, so for me, that was certainly the massive highlight and something that I'm just totally delighted that we got off the ground.
I'd just give our listeners a bit of understanding there. Craig, in a previous life, was in the office before he went out to one of our schools to be principal again, and had engaged with Jared. And for our listeners, episode 2, you would remember, if you need to listen again, to Dr. Jared Cooney-Horvath from Learning Made Easy. Some detail there. We recorded that episode just prior to those 3 days that Craig's referred to here. But Craig, in your professional work, to engage with someone, and I think you engaged Jared with our graduates in
Yeah, that's right.
18, 19?
Yeah, we had 3 years of Jared. Before COVID, we had Jared along to our graduate inductions, which was just fantastic. We had Jared and Glenn Pearsall working in tandem. So Jared talking about the science of learning, and Glenn was then talking about the pedagogical approaches that had the most powerful impact. And it was a great start for our graduate teachers. And it was always a thought of mine at that time that I would love to get Jared more involved with more teachers because of the power of his message and his understanding, his deep, deep understanding of the science of learning and what are the mechanisms that underpin learning for everyone.
And to have that play out 6 or 7 or 8 years later, whatever it is, for all Sandhurst staff, I'd imagine pretty profound on a personal level as well.
Oh, it was. And at the end of our 3 days with Jared, I just had this quite a surreal experience, to be honest, and it was like, look what we've made happen. And for everyone to get to hear Jared's message, for me, was just it was a lovely moment. And the fact that then it became so well received, just it brought together my thinking and desire for this to happen. To see it play out so well was magnificent.
Congratulations. Your own journey as a genuine learner in this space and leader of science of learning. Talk to me quickly about that time frame. And just so everyone knows, Craig was on our steering committee to be part of setting up Magnify Sandhurst last year and has now, as I said, joined the office. So perhaps your own learning and journey in the science of learning and how you see that playing out in all things Magnify Sandhurst.
It's been a massively interesting journey, and I know one of the themes that from our talks that we've had with our principals is wishing we knew stuff earlier and knowing better and doing better. And in some ways I was aligned to the terminology we might use as a student-centred and inquiry-based learning approach, but when I started to delve into and hear about the science of learning, it really challenged me. It really challenged me about what students need to be successful learners, and really what they need is someone who knows, an expert, let's call them a teacher, up the front who has a really clear, precise way of teaching them the things that they need to know. And it really shifted my thinking. And I also then came across the work of Professor Daniel Willingham and his great book, Why Don't Students Like School? And that was probably my first experience of really thinking about and hearing about cognitive science and this whole body of research that's been out there that really has been not exposed as a teacher or as a principal. You weren't exposed to it. It's like we had this field working out there that's understanding learning in such a deep and profound way. And then we had teachers as educators over this other side who were doing their best to educate and help students to learn, but without talking to this other group who was doing all this magnificent background work. So really the science of learning brings that together, attempts to bring that together to say, we know this about learning, you guys know this about teaching, so let's bring that together to see how powerfully this can impact the students in our care. And I think this is what Magnify is attempting to do.
Good on you, Craig. We might touch on some of these themes throughout, and you can chip in with some other responses, of course, as we go along. But where you just took me then, the Right Honourable Nick Gibb led much of the system change in the UK more than 15 years ago now, with the development of some system-wide approaches for the all of England education. And I heard Nick speak and know that he spoke about the significance of system solidarity in the way that that whole change can happen. So I know that there's work that's happened in relation to that multi-school organisation, but when you just touched on then knowing better and doing better, but also a way of systematic response across many of our settings is really important. So we're just going to cut to some of our quotes. We're very lucky to have spoken with 4 of our principals from primary and secondary. Through today's episode, we're just going to hear different bits and pieces, but our first compilation is really just some short pieces from Lorraine and Jasmine and Alannah and Matt about system solidarity. Where does it sit with what we're doing in Magnify Sandhurst?
Schools up here probably felt on the outside of the diocese, and I think now this notion that we're actually building more than just CCW is really starting to take hold, and that idea that we've got such expertise across the diocese and such a responsibility across the diocese is really starting to be more present in people's minds as we move forward in this.
They know the cues from their teachers. They know that when they look next door, the same thing is happening. So there's no distraction. Our kids, they know what's happening and they're engaged and definitely seeing the benefits.
What helps is our team knowing that they can reach out to CES, knowing that they can reach out to other schools as well. We are really collaboratively working together towards this as a system. One of the great things about being part of Magnify is that broader network and the supports that are available.
At the end of the day, we're all in. And if we're all in, how far does that all in go? And I think it goes as far as you can take it in the low variance space. So our teachers can deliver the appropriate curriculum and content to the students that they know really well without having to develop that. That's what we're trying to do.
It's clear from those comments that those four principles, and I know, Craig, we've come from a Learning Leaders Day and we've been fortunate enough to be part of Principals Days. The buy-in across Sandhurst is really significant from our leaders and from our staff. I really like what Matt said there about being all in. What have you observed around this all-in and solidarity approach in Sandhurst?
I think what I'm really noticing, and we've got 4 exemplary principles here, so that's telling in itself, but what I really notice is schools that bit the bullet and brought in early are reaping the benefits, and it's that, and I'll keep referring back to the work of Jared, but Jared spoke about the way we process information either through top-down, when something's new and difficult, versus bottom-up once we've secured the learning and we're just using our long-term memory. And I think for schools, we all started in this top-down phase, and then the quicker you accept that reality and accept that challenge, the more quickly you can move into bottom-up. So this just becomes the way of being. And what I'm seeing with these principles here, and we haven't had to think as a whole system before. We've only ever had to think of the school that we work in. And as a school principal, that's all I had to think about was, how do I make this school better? But for the first time, we've had to think about, how do we make the system better? And how do I, as a school leader, fit into that system? And what I'm seeing here is people that accepted that quickly and early and bought into it, and them and their schools are now reaping the benefits.
And it's really powerful to hear that comment from Jazz that talks about that predictability. And I know that comment that she's referred to here is talking about the students and their level of predictability. But I'm also hearing, and I'm not sure if you are as well, from our principals, the benefit of knowing that other leaders are experiencing the same thing, so they can have the same conversations regarding the collective challenge that we in Sandhurst face and how we can work together to overcome that.
And I think we can even take that down to a teacher level. And I was talking to one of our school leaders one day who's in a very big school, who has a friend teaching in a very little school in Sandhurst. And she said, for the first time, we can talk about the exact same curriculum that we're teaching, and we can support each other despite the size of our schools. And that's magnificent.
It was really lovely to hear Alannah make reference to the connection and also Lorraine in terms of being part of something perhaps a little bit bigger, because we are a diverse diocese in so many ways, from a small school of 20 to a big school of 1,700. And so it was just great, I thought, to feel that there's this sense of connection and connectivity between our leaders and our staff.
Absolutely. People even not only taking on board what we're doing, but thinking about the implications of making this even more powerful down the track.
Let's go there. We might play that piece from Matt.
What we're starting to do is pull the threads together around instructional model, cognitive load, and the daily review. And those conversations, they've been nourishing, and we've got more to have.
Listening to Matt, he's thinking a little bit down the track as well, and thinking about, we've done this as a system, so what are the other things that we can do as a system? And I know Matty references the fact that our school improvement plans, our annual action plans, even having a model of instruction, can we develop a similar model of instruction for the whole diocese? So people even not only taking on board what we're doing, but thinking about the implications of making this even more powerful down the track.
For some context, Matt Carver's executive principal overseeing one of our secondaries, St Mary's the Angels, Nathalia, but also St Francis, a primary school on the same location. And it's just great to hear Matt really buying in, someone that's been a leader of learning and teaching and a leader of schools in Sandhurst for so long, to come to, hey, we're all in here, and what are our limits? Are there any? What else can we do as we strive forward into the future? It's really exciting to hear, and stay tuned, more to follow in that space.
Absolutely. It's a great challenge for us as a system to look at those points that he's raised there, to think about, well, how do we accommodate even more support for schools around whole system approaches to certain things that they're required to do?
Craig, you touched on it a moment ago, But across all 4 interviews, the principals spoke really movingly about their staff, not just compliance to do as they're told and to get going because the system said, but their courage on taking huge shifts in practice, personal and at a school level. Acknowledgement that the change can feel confronting, especially for experienced teachers, but change is different for anyone, and you can talk through some of the science of learning process there as well about top down and bottom up. But it just came through again and again and again from our principals around this trust in what we're doing together, that we are a system in solidarity, but by goodness there was some high praise, as there should be, of our staff in schools.
Yeah, and it being part of the steering committee, which is a great thrill, a real honour to be asked to be part of that. And to hear people talk about the trust in the steering committee is just such a powerful message. And I think that's something that we can't take for granted, that people have put trust in a group of people coming together to say we need to look at a new way of doing things, despite the fact that this might be in contradiction to the way we've done things in the past. And to ask people to pick up what they're doing, to shift that practice over to this way of doing things now is quite a monumental thing to have to do. And to be honest, it was something I was a little bit nervous about how it would be received. But to see the response from these leaders about how their staff have taken on board these changes and accepted the fact that this is the way it needs to be is fantastic. But I also think that comes back to how the leaders have led the change. You know, people pick up what we put out there, and as leaders who are enthusiastically embraced the change, whether they felt really genuinely enthusiastic about it or they knew they had to fake it until they made it, then their staff have picked up what they've put down. So it's a brilliant result for us as a diocese.
Oh, we're so lucky to have such good people leading different parts of Magnify Sandhurst at every level, from our teachers and support staff leading some of our interventions, and we'll get to some of the success stories that we're already starting to hear a little bit later on. But trepidation came to my mind as you were talking then, and Lorraine makes a beautiful quote about that. We're now going to hear from something that Lorraine said about trepidation, following by what Alannah says. She refers to her staff as superstars, which, knowing Alannah for a little while, she loves saying superstars, and they are superstars at St Libs. And then Jazz talks about making peace with this change, and we'll hear from Matt as well about change management.
So particularly at the start of the year, there was some trepidation from staff around, how will students go with behaviour routines in secondary schools? And when we worked through it, just the staff willingness to just give it a go and see what was going to work and commit to doing it was fantastic. And even if we didn't get it right first time, it was okay because we all had the support of one another.
Our staff have been superstars, and I mean that really genuinely. It was a huge change and they have just jumped in. They have done a great big dive into the deep end and are going really well. I am so proud of the support that they are offering each other. I am so proud of their positivity and their resilience.
I am in awe of what they have taken on to the level of what we've asked, with the trust in all of us and the vulnerability. My staff have been complete game changers, and I am so grateful for the fact that they just stripped everything back and said, right, yeah, we'll just go with it. And I think they definitely are feeling satisfied, more at peace for some of them with the new direction. But now we're also starting to see data. So data talks, doesn't it?
You can use a lot of energy in asking some why questions, and it's certainly appropriate to ask why questions. I trust the process. My job is to navigate the 2 ships in Nathalia in that direction, knowing it's difficult, knowing that change management takes time, knowing that fatigue will come in because we're all in. And I don't mind being all in. I think it's good.
One of the things I want to reflect on after hearing our leaders speak there is this idea, and it resonated really strongly from our days with Jared around his talk about stress and learning. And stress is something that cops a bit of a bad rap in most circles these days. But Jared talked about the importance of stress in learning, and I think that really struck a chord with people. And what I'm picking up too from thinking about this need for our schools to change is it does create stress, and we can think about that as a negative thing, but if we really reflect on the power of stress in learning, that a moderate amount of stress over a reasonably short period of time is actually fantastic for learning, and it biologically prepares us to learn. So schools have been in a stressful place, and we need to acknowledge that, but hopefully they see themselves coming out of that and into a more comfortable space, and in a space that they are ultimately really ready to learn.
And Craig, I think you touched on earlier about the leadership in the learning process of the teacher. And it just aligns with so much of what we've heard from all of our partners through all of our podcasts prior to this about teach first, knowledge rich, facts first, we heard from Jared. That makes perfect sense. But the confidence that comes with the teacher in being able to lead that way is an adjustment, isn't it? And a response to some of that change stuff. So knowing better, doing better, but feeling confident to be able to lead better or teach first is really important.
And I think we can see that, from the talks we're having around the diocese, we can see that we're starting to hit that sweet spot now of people just feeling more comfortable with what they're doing and seeing more justification for what they're doing through the results they're seeing in student learning. And it's a nice spot to be in.
And there's a couple of points here we're just going to talk about. We'll cut to a piece from Jazz, principal at one of our bigger primaries, St Mary's in Echuca, talking about kids and their feeling of being proud and confident about their learning.
Listening to the kids who are so now proud, confident, not misbehaving because they don't know how to access, they've got this huge sense of success. On the back end of that, feeling a bit of guilt, knowing that they possibly have sat in spaces for so long, not getting what they needed.
I'd just really like to pick up on the point that Jasmine reflected on there about there's some guilt associated with knowing that there's been a period of time where kids haven't got what they needed, and that resonates so strongly with me because I think one of the things that happened to me as I started to investigate the science of learning and really come to understand the mechanisms that support students in their learning was this is something I felt I'd deprived students of for the first 30 years of my educational life, and it's hard not to feel bad about it. But I think this bit of a mantra that we've got going about know better, do better is really important for us to remember because you can't do better with something you don't know about. And the whole purpose of our Magnify initiatives was to bring the best of what we know now about how we learn to the fore. So we have to embrace the good that it's doing now and not feel bad about previous practice that may not have aligned to what we know now. You're not hiding to nothing when you think like that.
And to hear the impact that change is having, it's a two-prong, isn't it? To go, I should feel guilty. No, you shouldn't. You should celebrate that this kid is identifying this thing in their learning. And we hear that now from Alannah about a grade 6 at St Lib's.
One of our Year 6 students was helping me lead the tour, and a parent said to them, well, what do you like about St Liborius? What makes this place really good? And she said, I love our new approach to learning. She said, not that what we were doing was bad, but I've learnt more this year than I have in all of my years of school because I know what to expect.
One of the things I just love hearing is this, not only the shift in our teachers and in our principals and the way we're going about things, but also the acknowledgement that students are picking up what's happening. And I know St Libs have been on a very definite learning journey over the years and have had to make some adjustments through Magnify, which is not easy to do, to adjust their pedagogical approach. And that piece from a Year 6 student out at St Libs saying that I love our new approach to learning, not that what we did before was bad, but I've learned more this year than in all my years of school because I know what to expect. Like, it's such a powerful statement about the predictability of our classrooms and about the predictability of our learning environment. And it's sort of supported in some ways what Maddie Carver was saying about the Year 7 teacher who, upon the conclusion of one of their Echuca units and the teachers responding that how much the students had learned, and this Echuca stuff just might be okay. And it was a fantastic result.
After the first Echuca unit, the kids pulled a really solid result. And in conversation with the teacher, it was around, maybe there's something in this Echuca stuff. Maybe there's something in the work that we're doing. And I said, well, maybe there's something in that too, but maybe there's something in the quality of your work as the teacher. And maybe there's something in the fact that you've got a great group of kids who had an appetite for learning in that space.
And again, it hits on that point from Matt. I think hits on the change and that it is new and that there's a challenge in adapting to the utilisation of a different set of resource, no different to driving a new car or getting a new something and giving that a go. There's a change period, isn't there?
Absolutely.
The bit that was just so pleasing to hear, and we heard it in the podcast that Ash Marsh led with the classroom mastery leaders about calm, predictable, safe orderly learning environments. It was such a great episode. We've just got a couple of really great little anecdotes from Lorraine and from, again, Matt Carver about the impact that this has had on a Year 11 student and a Year 9 student at their school.
I was speaking with some of our Year 11 students, and one of our students who's undertaking the VM pathway asked me the question. He said, "Miss, what's the go with all these routines now?" And I said, "Oh, look, we're doing them because we want to make sure that all students are just focused on their learning and so that everybody knows what to expect." I said, "What do you think of them?" He said, "Miss," he said, "they're great, aren't they?" He said, "The place just feels so calm and it feels like I don't have to worry about things when I walk into the classroom." And for me, I went, that's my why, and that's my favourite point of this whole year so far, that for a student like him who has to spend so much cognitive load thinking about the external things, can now just walk in somewhere and feel calm, comfortable and safe.
A Year 9 boy said, "Hey, I wasn't sure about this stuff at the start. Why are we doing this? But I can see that my classes are more calm. We have more time for learning." So we do have our students who have been able to reflect that they can also feel and see a change because of the classroom mastery routines.
To all the parents out there, you will have been wondering what's going on with lining up, what's this classroom entry, and our schools have taken to this so strongly because they fundamentally know now that every single minute of every single class time period matters so much. And already to get that feedback from some students about it's a bit calmer, actually I can now attend to what matters most, and of course that's learning, is just such a really powerful thing. I love that from Lorraine. That's my why.
I think that this is the biggest surprise that I've had through this process is seeing the response to the classroom mastery and knowledge society work, and maybe having my own personal doubts about how this might land in some secondary schools. And I know some secondary schools had doubts about how it would land in their environments as well. But the response to it, not only from the perspective of students know how to line up and how to leave the room and calls to attention, but the impact that it's having on learning and the learning environment and the load that it's taken off students frees them up cognitively and emotionally to attend to the learning. And I think that's just a consequence that I didn't quite see landing the way it did, and it's such a wonderful result.
And the point that Lorraine makes there around that particular learner to be freed of concern to enter a space. I was lucky enough to be in that conversation with Lorraine, and you could feel some deep and rich emotion to that. To hear that about one is brilliant, but it is just so enriching and rewarding to think that there are so many kids that aren't at Year 11 that are potentially going to benefit from calm, orderly, predictable learning environments for their whole journey through Catholic Education Sandhurst education.
They won't know any different. So students moving through this process now in our primary schools will not know any different as they move into their secondary school environments. That is just going to play out so well for our secondary school teachers as they know these kids are coming in. They don't have to teach them these routines in the first instance. They know them, and all they have to do is reinforce them. And I'd just like to give a shout out to our senior students, our Year 11 and 12 students in our schools, who understandably wanted to push back against this. Why do we have to line up? Like, they want to be treated more like adults. So it's also a shout out to the teachers and principals who helped to explain to them, but we need you guys to do it so the rest of the school can follow. It's going to be great for everyone's learning, but we need you to model it. And for those students at this time in their lives to take that on for the greater good, I think is a massive credit to them and to the schools that helped lead them in that conversation.
Couldn't agree more. And I'm not sure if it was touched on in one of these 4 chats or in some others, but there was a conversation I had recently with one of our secondary leaders that said a bit of an aha moment for one of their senior kids when they realised it actually wasn't about them. They were doing it for the kid next to them that they perhaps didn't realise was carrying that level of anxiety going to the classroom, or they were doing it for consistency of whole school practice. That was something that they made mention to their senior students, and their senior students just went, oh yeah, it's not about me. This might help someone else learn. So I've just got a shelve that I'm a bit dirty on having to line up as a 17-year-old kid.
Wouldn't it be a wonderful world if we could all move away from thinking this is all about me and it might be for the benefit of someone else?
Yeah. We touch on a really important theme that has come through these interviews with our principals, and that's about the effective leadership structures and strategies and processes that they've had to put in place in leading change. Kate Fogarty, our Executive Director, led a session with our principals and our learning leaders already this year about the challenges of leading change. And we know, and we can reflect back, the ones that have managed it particularly well seem to establish consistent structures and processes and mechanisms for their staff and students to work through with this change. So we'll go to something that Jasmine Ryan said about the change process that she's led at St Mary's, Echuca.
Got a green, amazing, energetic leadership team. We went straight into learning about change and leading change. So we started doing our PD together, and that's evolved, and obviously with system support and a little bit of insight to that as well, knowing what we needed to do. And then what we've done is our year level leaders were also ready for some challenging leadership and some content that they could also support. So we've made change teams around the programs of Magnify. So we've got a change team for science and learning, for OCA, numeracy, literacy, and so on. So that they are another layer and voice of support and expertise for our staff, where we're regularly having our PLCs. They're in classrooms, playing with Step Lab, doing drop-ins, but facilitating that change. So trying to, I guess, foresee problems before they're coming.
I'd just like to also piggyback on that and talk about, we had our Learning Leaders Day over at Shepparton the other day, and I displayed some work that St Mary's Echuca had done following the Science of Learning days we did with Jared. And it did really give evidence to the fact that they've set up some really nice structures there that are really supportive of our Magnify initiatives, and the work that the team produced in bringing to life and owning how they were going to live out their science of learning ideals within their school was a real reflection of a well-organised team that was really responsive and ready to move on what they'd heard. So you can't do that without good structures.
Exactly. And Alannah and Lorraine, we're going to hear from now, both make mention around how they've reworked their leadership structures, what it takes to align structures, language, frameworks in the work at their schools.
At the end of last year, we reworked our leadership structure, preempting what may have evolved through our learning and teaching team, through the work of learning leaders, to discern the information and to work out who needs to know what, when they need to know the bits of information, and what supports are needed is really important.
Magnify is not just something we do, it is about who we are at Catholic College, our approach. And so that's going to take a lot of work in terms of the underpinning of our structures, our language, the frameworks that we use. You know, it's that linking of our annual action plans, our school improvement plans, really clearly aligned to Magnify rather than just the overall CESL strategic plan. We've got to be aligned with that Magnify, and that alignment piece will continue and will need to keep as the focus, and that language will need to be kept at the forefront of our minds.
I just am quite taken by Lorraine's quote there. It says about Magnify, it's not just something that we do, but it's who we are. And so that just talks to the desire to totally buy in as we keep moving through this process, and not just see Magnify as a set of initiatives that we have to engage in, but they become the very essence of what embodies our schools.
And we hear that from Matt Carver as well, where he's talking about pulling different threads together and how that happens, but also the where to next for that school in terms of some of that work. So we'll hear from Matt now.
And I wonder if that's where we want to go next, might be a more common low variance instructional model across all of the Sandhurst schools. Not just here what we're trying to do at St Mary of the Angels, but a similar model across other schools.
I'd just like to pull on another thread from Matt's comment there, and that's the fact that here we are, our school leaders, our school principals, who can often get bogged down in compliance and, you know, all these really important things, you know, child safety, compliance issues, etc. And here we are talking about instructional models, daily reviews, cognitive loads, and I feel like we're giving people a language now, a real language that our leaders can use in their schools to help support and drive the initiatives that we're undertaking. It's just wonderful to hear.
We're recently very, very lucky to hear from Emma Starkey from Star Academy in the UK. And she was talking about exactly that, a language, an induction and formation process of leaders over many years of this journey with them and their academy. And you can't help but be excited by the notion that we're developing a consistent diocesan-wide language set around learning and teaching. And the power that goes with that and the learning that goes with that is really, really significant.
Absolutely, and I think it has the potential to keep driving these initiatives forward, and something that we'll come to take for granted soon enough, that we have this common language across our diocese now that we all understand and are brought into.
Another point that Emma makes mention of, and I scribble it down, I'm going to put it somewhere, we are siblings, but we're not twins within their multi-school organisation, and I think that's a really important thing about being. Alannah makes mention about being authentically St Liborius, as well as, of course, authentically Sandhurst, and we know that that's a critical part of who we are in a broader sense. But what does that look like in that subsidiarity piece at a local level? And I just love that from Emma to talk of, we're in the same family, but we're not identical twins. And I think that that's a really, really special consideration as we continue to move forward with Magnify Sandhurst.
And I think an interesting point there, Tim, is as we bring schools together under this, Magnify banner, and the challenge for schools is how do we keep our own sense of identity in that? And I think that's an important thing for schools to keep considering. And St Liborius is just an excellent example of a school that philosophically had a real distinct pedagogical approach.
And Alannah speaks about that here when she talks about it was challenge and positive.
Was a challenge and a positive at the same time to dig down deep into our practices and really redefine who we are as a school and what makes us authentically St Liborius approaches to learning and teaching within the context of Magnify.
And part of that learning extends to families, doesn't it? And so we hear this from Jasmine that talks about the parents and the level of engagement at St Mary's in Echuca.
Had our parents sit down and do OCA and do multi-lit, and they are flipping whiteboards and getting on the hock, okay, phonemic spelling, are you right? Have you got these rules? And they've really enjoyed that, and they've walked away going, wow, what's going on in your rooms? So we're going to leverage that next semester and have explicit learning walks for our parents, because there was such a little bit of we're interested, so we're going to shake that up a bit.
One of the great possibilities that has emerged out of this is a way of rethinking about how we've always done things in our schools. And one of those things we have is opportunities for parents to come in and towards the end of the term and see the learning that's taken place, learning showcases and the like. And I really love that opportunity that St Mary's Echuca brought together from that experience to flip it and say, instead of coming in and having a look at what the students have done, we're going to take you through the process of how the students are learning. And they sat their parents down and they did a learning session with them where they used their mini whiteboards and they had to chin it and go through the experience of being the learner. So there's no better way to bring parents into the picture than to putting them through that learning process themselves. So congratulations. That's a great shout out to those guys.
It's been great to hear, and I was at Galen College in Wangaratta. It was great to hear the mini whiteboards are coming out in their entirety for our secondaries, and kids are doing that. And we know that from a pedagogical standpoint, Craig, and I know you can speak to that as well, about the benefit of the opportunity to respond more frequently and to show evidence around that for kids and that check for understanding for teachers.
I just love hearing that the mini whiteboards are making their way into our secondary schools, because I've just recently led some VCE webinars, and one of the things that we've really come to understand is that learning involves thinking, and if you're not thinking, you're not learning. And as a teacher, how can I try and ensure that all the children in my classroom are thinking? And mini whiteboards just is the most magnificent, simple tool that we can use to get all students to respond in the first instance, so to make sure they're all thinking and responding, but then as a teacher to be able to get that instant feedback that you can see what that thinking is and how that impacts that future learning trajectory that we're about to be on. Do I need to stop here and go back, or am I free to march forward? So the power of the mini whiteboards can't be understated, and I really hope that most of our secondaries are in that process now of thinking about how they could introduce them into all of their classrooms.
Craig, it's been great reflecting on some of those key themes, and we're really looking forward to announce a continuing partnership with Learning Made Easy and some work that we're going to have Jared do. Do you want to touch on part of that exciting work?
Well, this is super exciting. Following the success of our 3 days with Jared and following schools requesting, say, can we get Jared in to talk to our students, talk to our parents, or how do we get this message out more broadly? Because people saw that there was a need for this message, not just to stop with us as educators, but to get it out more broadly into our community. So, yes, we've done some follow-up with work with Jared, and he's very happily come to the party to say, yeah, he'd love to run some sessions with our parents, for our parents, on understanding the role of stress, sleep, technology, all those things that have the potential to really impact student learning and well-being, to talk to our students directly about productive study habits and about why they need sleep and why they should get off their devices, and to continue to work with our staff around understanding, even deepening more further, the understandings of those mechanisms that underpin learning. So it just has the potential to be such a powerful ongoing relationship with Jared that can be impactful for everyone engaged in learning to some degree in Sandhurst.
I think something that we've learned so much about, again, back to this ecosystem and solidarity that it sits in Sandhurst, is that we can do things differently, that we can do things smarter. And one of my great learnings was that time with Jared, to have someone from Portland beam into Bendigo to be streamed out then to all of our schools in any setting. People were so surprised that that could possibly work, to do that for 3 days. So now people don't even blink at the idea that, yeah, we're going to record something that we'll get it for 45-minute snip and it's just going to be awesome. And so it's with great enthusiasm that we look to that work. Craig, at the end of this episode, we always touch on a really, really important question, and you can go wherever you like from this, but from everything that we've discussed today, what matters most?
Tim, it's a great question about what matters most, and as I think about it, the answer becomes more and more obvious. And what matters most is that we're giving our students in our schools in rural and regional Victoria the best opportunity that's available to them to be the learner and person that they can be. The only reason we brought in any of these initiatives was because we saw that there was a gap in our students' learning, and that gap in students' learning has a direct impact on their life choices, who they can be as an individual and as a person, and the person that can impact the communities that they live in. So really, this is not just the work of being better at maths or better at English. It's about being a better person, and a person who has now more capacity to live the life that they want to live.
So awesome to hear you speak with such passion, and you would have perhaps even heard in Craig's voice that genuine sense of care for outcomes for kids. And that is exactly what we have felt in interviewing these 4 principals, in being with our learning leaders, in being with our principals, in our multi-lit school visits that are happening all this week across Sandhurst. We've just got people that care so much around outcomes for kids. And to be able to join that with this comment from Matt Carver about success of some early years intervention is just so telling.
Our F to 2 staff, their chests are out because our kids are scoring in the weekly testing around initial lit really strongly. Their test results are improved, the kids are going well, the staff are working hard, and they're starting to get some payoff for that work.
And I've cheated a little bit with what matters most, because that's what matters most. We've got kids that are already showing some improvement. We've got kids that were perhaps in need of a more targeted intervention that have already eliminated that need and can join whole class instruction at the level that they should be. And that should be a right of every single student in Sandhurst. And was privileged to be part of this podcast through the series. Kimberly asked Kate and I in that first episode what matters most, and we spoke about access and equity and bridging the attainment gap for kids in regional and rural communities. So to hear 16 weeks later evidence of that is just so incredibly profound.
Tim, it takes me back to a conversation that we had with a learning leader on Monday, and she was having a discussion with a Year 6 girl who was part of the Mac Lit program that reading's always been difficult for. So she's got through her primary school years and found reading difficult the whole way. And she said to her learning leader, she said, I finally understand how words work.
No better way to finish. Thanks so much to special guest and learning leader Craig Simpson for his work today, and for everyone that's contributed to Magnify Sandhurst to June of 2025. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Magnify Matters. Make sure to follow the show and share it with someone who cares about great teaching and learning. You can also leave a review or connect with us online at Catholic Education Sandhurst. Until next time, stay with us as we magnify what truly matters.